Okay, let's begin. It's nice to see so many friendly and familiar faces. So dear friends, colleagues and special guests, I bid you a warm welcome to Rome and to AUR. We are delighted to have you here at the 13th Annual AMICAL Conference. As you know, the focus of our program this year is libraries and digital initiatives, a theme that is impacting libraries and universities worldwide. I need to apologize for the weather. I think we're going to get rain later today as well. Had it been in my control, we would have had sunshine. Not even having the Pope down the road helped, actually. However, I do hope that it doesn't ruin your conference experience. We need to acknowledge and thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Without their support, we certainly wouldn't be sitting in this room together in the Eternal City. It is thanks to the foundation that AMICAL members are able to get together, network, and pursue projects and ideas. I'd also like to mention our sponsors, whose contribution is fundamental in aiding the local organization. This year's platinum sponsors are EBSCO Information Services, Hein Online, Wiley & Sons, and YBP Library Services. Okay. Before I introduce AUR's president, some housekeeping, as Alex calls it. This morning's coffee break will take place in the auditorium. There'll be coffee served at the back of the room. The community idea exchange sessions that were originally planned for the garden will now take place on the second floor of Building B. Okay? And the session, should EdTech have an ethos, instead of being held in classroom B204, it will be held in B304. The online program is up to date with these new venues, and we will also post a copy of the program in the garden. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Richard Hodges, an archaeologist who has been president at AUR since 2012, to say a few words of welcome.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to the American University of Rome. We're a small university, as you probably have appreciated, of about 500 students. We've been here for now, we were founded in 1969, allegedly for CIA spies, like most of you. That's the origin of most of these organizations. Now we're struggling with the reality that globalization, and in Italy, struggling with globalization is a major issue, as you probably are well aware. We're struggling with the cultural changes that globalization has brought, and the changes in particular towards four-year studentships and master's programs and so on. We're trying to move away from where we found it as a study abroad program, which I suspect accounts for many of your universities as well. So we're in the middle of a culture shift in the world of globalization. And as I was thinking about that, walking here, since Rosa mentioned I'm an archaeologist, I thought I would talk a bit about archaeology today, because I usually talk about the university, but since you're all into technology and into libraries, it perhaps might be interesting for you to understand where you come from. Because I suspect you all think you come from Silicon Valley, and you don't. Your roots are actually in the monasteries, like this monastery. This is a monastery we're in. The monasteries and the revolution that took place, it's known as the Correctio, at the end of the 8th century AD. In the 7th century AD, Rome, the Roman Empire collapsed totally. We, as a 21st century community, find that collapse almost impossible to believe. The Italians find it totally impossible to believe, but if you have a moment, go down to the Crypta Balbi and examine the museum there, and you'll see that the last 30 years of excavations have shown that Rome, a city of 1 million in the time of Augustus, probably have 4,000 or 5,000 monks in it around the beginning of the 8th century. So it changed dramatically. It's hard for us to imagine that unless you've lived in Detroit. And so, thinking about it, what happened in the 8th century? In the 8th century, the monks who survived all the traumas of change, and change as globalization, as we know, is quite traumatic, the monks who were few had a very, very simplistic attitude towards prayer and towards management of their lives. They lived in places like Monte Cassino, where I was yesterday with the abbot. And in those places, they lived in tiny monasteries that you could basically just about fit into this room and one other. In the course of the 8th century, they recognized that if they went on like this, the world, which had been reduced to basically Neolithic proportions, it's very hard, isn't it, to get your head around that, reduced to Neolithic proportions, could change if they thought about how to do it. And a monk in northern Germany, Benedict of Aniana, came up with the premise. And he created the Reformed Benedictine program, known as basically Benedict of Aniana's Reforms, or more familiarly as the Carolingian Renaissance. And part of that process was to change monasteries from where one just labored to where you had specialists, sort of prototypes of IT people, health and safety, you name it, was brought in at the end of the 8th century. Now, you may find that hard to believe, but the monasteries switched as though globalization and Facebook had come about sometime in the 780s and sometime in the 790s. Most people find that pretty hard to believe till you tell them about the first euro. The euro is part and parcel of this, because the kings at the time saw that if you had no currency, you had no way of taxing people. If you had no way of taxing people, how did you create any kind of base for sustaining yourself? So the euro was part of it. The reform euro of 793 is the first adventure into the European Union concept, which was exactly imitated by the Treaty of Rome in 1956 or 57, I forget which year it was, which tried to replicate exactly what had happened at the end of the 8th century. Anyway, from your point of view, what happened at the end of the 8th century was that the monasteries gauged that if they went on as monks just working on the land, in other words, all you guys were just cleaning the fields around here, you'd never get any further in terms of the spirituality or the economy of society. So they created librarians. They created librarians. They created people who made books. They created the people who made the skins. They created the people who made the straps that are made of metal that held the books together. And of course, they had to have more people who could write the books with all the instruments you needed to write the books. All of that happened around the early 9th century. Now, when that happened, yeah, I can see I've got you now, haven't I? You can see all of that visually as librarians and IT people. You can see it visually in the first plan of a monastery, which is the so-called Plan of St. Gall, which is a blueprint. It's a kind of Silicon Valley blueprint, just as there was a Frankfurt blueprint for the euro in 793. And of course, the blueprints don't exactly work. That's what you're talking about today. How do you make it fit? So what happened next? And this is the key point. This is the key point. They created these new monasteries with books as libraries. And then they realized these huge operations. Saint-Denis, by the American University of Paris, is the classic. Monte Cassino, you may have heard of, but there are many others. Fulda, Lorsch, if any of you are from Germany. There's a huge one in Canterbury, and so on and so on and so on. These were the communities that determined the nature of the first European Union, not the European Central Bank, not Milan, which was a nowhere place, not Florence, which didn't really exist. It was places like Saint-Denis outside Paris, or the one I excavated, San Vincenzo Volturno, in a lost part of Italy called Molise. They then faced a challenge, because if you grow, you have to sustain yourself. So the little monasteries were sustained by the kings, but the big monasteries now had hundreds of people in. Librarians, people to sustain the librarians, to feed them, cooks. They had to have the metal workers to create the clasps, which we excavated at San Vincenzo Volturno, the only illustration of such things. So you needed to have a different regime. So what you went and did in the 830s and 840s was to find sponsors. You found sponsors. Yes, now you can see the analogy. So after 30, 40 years of experimenting, how do you keep the library and all the rest of it afloat? They had to find sponsors. And then what began was fundamentally one of the most important moments in world history, because sometime in the 830s or the 840s, depending on where you are in Europe, because the French and the Germans were always ahead of where, for example, the Italians were. Sometime in the 830s, the 840s, they designed a model to bring in other supporters to these monasteries. And what did they give them in return for coming to the monastery, for supporting its upkeep, for dealing with its health and safety, if you want to put it that way? What did they actually give them back in return? They created the notion of the counter-gift. So you gave as an aristocrat to a monastery, and the monastery tried to tie you in to that place. And what was the premier counter-gift? A book. They gave icons, of course, which you'll be familiar with, but books were the key to creating this set of relationships. And from that, in the mid-9th century, so-called feudal society, it grew and it grew. I got 2 minutes left. She thinks I'm being boring, but I'm trying to actually get across a message. It's a very fundamental message that's very hard for us in 2016 in a small university, and many of you in diverse universities, to grasp. They went through globalization of a different kind, much more reduced, at the end of the 8th century. They had to adapt to it. And they adapted and sustained the monasteries, the libraries, and created the books. The monasteries, the books, as you know, because you've still got them. If you go to Monte Cassino, you can still see the monastery, you can still see the library from that period. That, incidentally, in 1992, was the first place I ever saw a scanner, in the library of the Abbey of Monte Cassino. Such was their interest in sustaining these things. As we move forward as a small community or small communities, we need to learn from these things, because frankly, if we don't adapt, we will die. And the great thing about the middle of the 9th century, which is why I'm proud to be an archaeologist, is that all the monks would believe you, have you believe, that the Vikings and the Saracens destroyed all these libraries, that the Vikings and the Saracens destroyed this kind of culture. In actual fact, the people who received the books, the loaners, the students of the libraries, went on to create their own new libraries, their own new belief in precisely this kind of system. So that in the end, the spirituality that began in such a small way in the 8th century became fundamental to how Europe was by the year 1000, in which books and presumably periodicals at the time played such a big part. As a small university, we are struggling with that. And as a small university, we're struggling because, frankly, we can see our students aren't reading enough or writing in the right way. And one of the challenges in 2016 is to make sure that we don't end up victims of the Vikings and the Saracens as the world is changing, but actually, as in the 9th century, can use these sorts of great implements to grow and develop and to create some sustainability that is so fundamental to our economies. Libraries are fundamental, as they found out in the 9th century. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hodges. We have hidden timekeepers monitoring us, so we have to stick to our schedule. Now I'd like to introduce the person that has been keeping me very busy over these last 7 months. I've actually become, I think, addicted to Basecamp. AMICAL's director, Jeff Gima.
So it's Friday the 13th, and it's the 13th annual AMICAL meeting and conference. But I think we're okay because I made sure that enough mishaps happened yesterday to cover the whole event, so we're good. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank President Hodges and AUR for hosting the event here. And I want to thank Rosa, Fusco, and Francisco Wallner and the entire AUR team for the intrepid work that you guys have done in organizing and planning and running the event. I want to thank the coordinating committee, who actually took on an additional role this year of program committee for the conference. And in particular, I want to thank these folks who volunteered from other institutions to take on roles of coordinating key resources that we needed to make this event happen. So in particular, Ahmad El-Zawkani, Dimitris Tzouris, Omar Faroud, Ryan Fayed, and Ivana Stevanovic. So thank you guys for helping out. And of course, I'd like to thank again the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for the financial support that has enabled this conference to happen. This year's AMICAL conference is the first time that we've tried to tie as closely as we have the theme of the event to the current grant, which is funding so many of our programs, our consortial programs. We built this year's program under the theme of libraries and digital initiatives, aligning it with one of the strategic priority areas that we established in our current grant that's covering us through 2018. And that is the collaborative work of librarians, technologists, and faculty on curriculum-integrated digital initiatives. And so here is one way of looking at the breakdown of the group that's here in this room, the group that we're trying to get to collaborate together. Donald Waters, the Senior Program Officer for Scholarly Communications at the Mellon Foundation, writes in a recent blog post that the foundation is trying to help make the digital environment a natural place to do scholarship. And for AMICAL, we're considering this event as a milestone in our 3-year journey of the current grant, one step on our way towards making AMICAL a natural place for librarians, technologists, and faculty to collaborate on digital pedagogy, on digital collections, and on digital scholarship. And I want to credit Alex Armstrong with encouraging us to think about this event more strategically than we have in the past, and to shape it in a way that more actively supports our larger organizational goals. Alex has been working with AMICAL as our web developer and digital strategist for the past year, since last year, and in addition to creating a new website, he's created a system of profiles for our members, and an online forum. And all these things are part of a new environment that we're creating for AMICAL's online network of collaboration. But he's also contributed in important ways to our planning for new committees that relate to digital initiatives. And as you can see from the program, AMICAL's standing committees, which help to guide our consortial programs in areas like professional development and digital pedagogy, for example, these committees have been given a featured role in the event. Each committee has 2 chances to meet this week, and then during our closing session, we'll be giving what we're calling our 5+5 sessions. So they will take 5 minutes to share with us their plans for the coming year, and to invite, question, and inspire us around what we're doing. And then they'll give you 5 minutes to react and to question them. So in the meantime, We've got a great program of presentations, workshops, and discussions that touch on digital collections, scholarship, and pedagogy, but that also spread out in other directions of AMICAL's work. This word cloud was made out of the titles and abstracts of the session, titles and abstracts of our session programs, our program sessions. And I wanted to apologize to Eric Lees Morgan and his abstract, as well as the Birds of a Feather sessions, because in this version of the word cloud, I had to pull out the words stone, soup, beef, birds, and feathers, I think, which all occurred with great frequency. But I'm excited to have Eric here with us, as well as all the other invited speakers that we've got joining us for the conference. They're bringing an interesting mix of library-anchored digital scholarship, human-anchored approaches to educational technology, and the very human aspects of good collaboration that are necessary for any of this role bridging to really happen on our campuses. So we're bringing humanity to the digital humanities this week. And we're also, for part of the day tomorrow, bringing the to our conference. In just a second, give me 2 seconds. In just a second, Dimitris will explain what that's all about. Before he does that, I want to say just a few words about the dinner tonight. And in the spirit of building new connections across AMICAL and in encouraging the new folks to meet those in the group who have been with us, been active in the consortium for a while, we're going to mix up the seating. And so how this is going to work is when you show up at the restaurant, before you actually go inside to the restaurant, there'll be an urn filled with a random sort of mix of the table numbers. And so you pick out your table number, and that'll be the table where you're sitting. So you'll meet some new colleagues, and you'll have a chance to meet some new maybe dance partners too, we'll see. So Dimitris.
Can I pay for a premium number? Good morning, everyone. I have some. Can I just forward this? Okay. A few things about the AMICAL Unconference. We tried this 2 years ago in Athens, and it worked really well. So it's now a part of the core AMICAL stuff. And an Unconference is an informal set of sessions, and you, the participants, get to set the agenda. So you talk to each other, you meet new people, you connect with old colleagues, and you discuss, right? And I was on the bus yesterday, and I was talking to Angie from University of Central Asia, and I found out she's into podcasts and podcasting education. That's what her research is based on, and I find this very fascinating. And I would like to see a session about podcasting education. And this is actually the chance for you to propose these topics that come up in these informal conversations on the bus or during lunch, during dinner, and find a space to gather and talk about these things that come up and you have a common interest in. So a conference, an unconference session can be a group of people just talking about something they're interested in, or they can be just two people talking about something they're interested in. It doesn't have to be a big group. We used to have this board. Now we've moved to the new age. So we have a digital online board where you can access and enter your session suggestions. So you just type in your name, the topic, the session you're planning to do. If you have any needs regarding technology, if you need speakers, laptop, screen. And in the last column, others can write in their first name if they're interested. So we see which sessions generate more interest. And afterwards, tomorrow I will add an extra column in the end with the room, so you know where each session is happening. And this will be done during the break before the unconference sessions. And also tomorrow, after the morning keynote, you will have to just take the microphone and pitch your idea to the rest of the group, so everyone is aware that your session is happening, so they can sign up. Is that clear? Okay, that's all. This is also on the website. It's the address for the online board. So go there. You can just do it today, tomorrow, anytime you get this idea, you get this new proposal for a session, just go there and fill in the boxes. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Mahabeli from the American University in Cairo, and I'm here to introduce my friend Jim Broom. And you can't introduce Jim Broom in a very traditional way. So I'm going to start with this. He recently wrote a blog post about how bad things happen in threes. So I'm going to introduce him in threes, but they're a good set of 3 threes. So the first one is just the formal things you need to know about Jim. He's the co-founder of Reclaim Hosting, which is a hosting company that, first of all, offers affordable hosting for higher education institutions, and it's very easy to use, and I'm a big fan, and I think I'm one of the first users, right? Before that, he was at the University of Mary Washington, and he was the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning Technologies, which, by the way, those of you who went to DigPed Cairo, that's now Jesse Stommel's job. And when Jesse took that job, I found out that Jim's coming to Italy. So I said, let's have him here, and he agreed to come, so that's great. And the third thing, which is maybe what he's most famous for, is that he was the person who started the DS-106 course, which he says is not a MOOC, but it's open, it's online, it's pretty big. And it's kind of like a course, except that it's for life and it never ends. But he might talk about that a little bit today when he's talking about small. And then I want to say about 3 good things that are happening today with Jim. There's the keynote now, and this is live streamed, so virtual people can watch and participate using the hashtag AMICALNet and ask questions on YouTube. Then there's a virtually connecting session with Jim right after that, and then after that I'm doing a session with Jim, which is also going to be live streamed. So you're welcome if you're on site to join those, or if you're online to join those as well. And then 3 just funny things about Jim is, for someone who's been in technology for this long, until last October, he had never had a cell phone. And I wanted to tease him about that, but now he has a cell phone. Apparently they don't let you into Italy without a cell phone, do they? So now he has one, I can't tease him as much. He blogs so much that sometimes he blogs 3 times a day, and then if I blog that, I blog a lot too, but if I ever blog 3 times a day, I say I pulled the Jim Broom, because that's what Jim does. And the last thing is, that while working on my presentation with Jim, it was really funny because I discovered that he doesn't know how to schedule tweets. So a lot of the tweets that are going out during this session and in the next few hours are scheduled tweets. I'm not actually sitting here tweeting every 5 minutes. I scheduled them in advance, so don't think I'm crazy. Okay, so I'll let Jim come and start his talk. Apparently I have to keep a timer on him. I'm going to try to tell him when there's 5 minutes left, and then hopefully there'll be enough time for questions from people here and people online. Okay?
Thank you, Mama. I think it's good you're keeping it up. Probably a good thing that she's keeping a timer on me, because at some point they will have to stop me. They might have to drag me out of here. I'd like to start my presentations with the disclaimer. And so here's my disclaimer, as you can see. Your mind will be blown. So that might be problematic for some of you, and I just wanted to give you a heads up. And it's funny, President Hodges talked about the Silicon Valley rhetoric and ideology. This GIF is actually poking fun at the Steve Jobs mind-blowing Silicon Valley transformation. And in fact, a lot of what I'll be talking about today will be moving directly against that ideology and looking at questions of small. But I'm going to start not with some big overview, and that was a beautiful kind of discussion of the kind of history of where we are as librarians, and I don't pretend to anything as kind of eloquent and as kind of far-ranging as that. I'm going to get really, really small and really, really specific right away. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see, and I'm going to actually do a little driving. I talk pretty loud, so I don't think it will be a problem, but let me know if you do have any problems hearing me. And I am going to talk about this thing. this is an exhibit that we built last year at the University of Mary Washington. We called it the UMW Console. And I don't know, it's kind of a fisheye lens, and I don't know how you can see it. What we did is we built a 1985 living room, complete with paneling, right? There's a Back to the Future poster. There's actually a great little globe from 1985 that still has the USSR, right? And the kind of the way in which we had partitioned the world at that moment. You'll notice there's a few TVs. There's a perfect couch. All of what you see in terms of the furniture was found in our local university's storage. They just had it there. So we actually decided, we talked to the library and we talked to a group of people and we said, you know what? We want to create an exhibit. We want to create something that's a lived-in exhibit of a living room in 1985. So we found most of the furniture, but then we went on eBay and we bought the technology. And the beautiful thing about the 80s right now is no one values the technology. Like, everyone hates VHS, cassette tapes. Like, there's no value to that. So you can get it for dirt cheap, at least in the States. So we bought a ton of it, right? And all of this was done without any formal kind of recognition. And we bought the technology, and we also went to the theater department and we said, we'd like to build some panel walls. So we built some fake panel walls, and that was actually the most expensive part. It cost us $200 in materials at Home Depot. So we bought this thing, and you might be looking at me like, what are you talking about? But I want to actually think about this for a second, because some really interesting things happen as a result of it. I'm going to actually hold it. Yeah. We actually built this thing from scratch, as I said, and there's a look at it, and there's a bunch. But what we did and how we did it, and this is one of the great consoles, right? Atari 2600, talk about early moments of the digital, right? 85 is an interesting year. It's when Windows released Windows 1.0. It's when the Nintendo NES came out. Mario, Italy's greatest contribution to world history, was about to change everything for gaming. Sorry, Italy. It's also when the domain name registration system, which we all take for granted, right, started, 1985, January 1. So it's an interesting year to think about the concept of technology 35 years ago, right? Is it? Yeah, 30 years ago. 31, thank you. Someone can do math. That's us. I want to talk a little bit, this is a 1981 Quasar television we bought on eBay for $20. That's Sharon Stone. The movie is Total Recall, not actually time appropriate. For you librarians, it's an anachronism. I'm sorry about that. But we were testing this out. This is the actual VCR that I grew up with. It's a 1985 Panasonic. At the time, it cost $500. It was the Cadillac of VCRs. When our family got it, we sat around it and we all looked at it, right? And the blinking 12, as Dimitris was telling me to get, we all would sit, right? And praise it. This was, in fact, the greatest education I ever had. Might have been this box. This is actually a really interesting technology. This is called the RCA Select Division. Has anyone ever heard of this? It's a fascinating technology. It's actually, see that the day after? Do you remember that? Growing up, being a kid of the 70s and 80s, this was our kind of what happens after nuclear holocaust, right? We all woke up, and this was kind of during the Red Scare in America in the 80s under Reagan. This is an interesting technology. It's actually a vinyl video disc that was so terrible in terms of its quality that they had to build a turtle-like carapace around it so you would put it in, never touching the disc, and pull it out, and the needle would come and play the video. It was basically the precedent to what would be the laser disc. And so I found a box of 50, because it only lasted, terrible technology, it lasted from 78 to 83. I found a box of 50 discs for $30. I bought it up, beautiful. And the RCA Select Division, love this technology, right? All of the VHS went on eBay. If you have time, go on eBay and buy 2600 games now. Please, this is just 2600 porn right now, I'm sorry. Joust, right? I couldn't get enough of it. And this is actually what we bought. This is my son. I don't know how many of you remember. This is a 1985 game called Coleco Head-to-Head Football. Early digital game, right? Where you were these little, this is American football, so it might lose some context, but you were these little kind of digital LEDs that would run around. It made no sense. He became completely addicted to it. Playing a 1985 quasi-digital game. It was really interesting, right? And this is another digital game, a thing we bought. That's not digital at all. In fact, it's entirely analog. It's called Blip. And it's like ping pong. Right, boop, you go thing, and then you click another button, boop. I've never seen anything more analog. They call it the digital game. It was interesting because in 1985, I think there was some real dissonance about what digital meant. How did we understand digital? Most of the technology we're using at the time was still analog, right? And that brings me to the real, what I thought was, and we have actually, interestingly enough, faculty coming to us, bringing us their Atari 2600 games. This is history professor Sue Fernsetter, who's like, I want to donate a game to your exhibit. Because our exhibit was completely hands-on. You were pushed to use the technology. And what happened that was interesting around the community is our students and our alumni started donating stuff they wanted to get rid of, right? So we had a Commodore 20, a VIC-20 right there you could probably see. We have a Coleco, Vectrix. We have a whole series of those Selectavisions. Someone brought the Globe. All of this stuff was actually being built as a community exhibit. It was really kind of, for me, compelling. And that was actually a TV dedicated by one of the assistants, and there's us building the walls. I think the coolest thing about the exhibit and the whole thing we had done is one of the professors, Zach Whalen, whose idea it was to kind of build this, had his students create actual content out of it. Go in and imagine it. Now you'll see here, this is a TV with Young and the Restless. We brought in a video artist who, what he did, Michael Branson Smith, he programmed 20 hours of TV from 1985, including commercials. And it's really interesting what happened. He went in, he took a whole CBS, the whole lineup for the day, and we broadcast it in the living room. So when we turned on the TV, it was broadcasting real TV from that day. And what he did, and it's interesting, is you started to get these fascinating visuals, right? We were talking about Iraq as our allies in the Middle East in 1985. It's such a fascinating kind of cultural frame for how we understood our world through the media, how we consume that media. And far more interesting than the idea of the programs, although you may be a Young and Restless, were the commercials and how the commercials defined us. It was a really kind of fascinating example, and this was all day long. And then students took in a couple of vines, and they started building these amazing little kind of short digital frames around it. And we didn't only have the Selectavisions. We also had the Atari cartridges. We had the VHS, and they started doing some fun stuff. G.I. Joe Cobra, right? 3D, can't go wrong with Cobra. And then, you notice here, look at the actual quality of that TV. One of the things we did, and I still think I'm still kind of blown away by it, is this wasn't just a video input to an old cathode ray TV. We brought from China an actual transmitter that transmitted the digital signal to the TV's antenna. So actually we had 6 TVs in the room all playing the same thing because it was on the frequency of that channel. So we were actually reproducing the effect of what it would be like to watch TV. And there's a good example of that, right? Florence Henderson selling dishwashing detergent on 2 separate TVs at the same moment. Now think about this. What if you actually had more than one frequency with more than one channel? And what if you built a whole community of people programming your cultural context that you got from television? And how that actually created meaning for you in 1985. Because what we learned quickly about 1985 internet as we know it now, right, is actually television. And television in this context makes no sense. So what we try to do is reprogram and build out the television. And this is something we could do through just historical archives and looking online and searching newspapers and seeing what was played and when. And there's a whole community of folks online, they call them tape heads. Has anyone ever heard of tape heads? Tape heads are people who, for decades, have used VHS tape to record TV. They just constantly recorded TV. And they have massive thousands of VHS tapes capturing TV for decades. And if you look at these people online, there's a community, you can actually reproduce television in its cultural context specific through the commercials. So it's this fascinating independent archiving movement that's been going on for decades that created this. And I'm just completely compelled by this idea, and we didn't stop at video. This is actually a Sears catalog. Fascinating, right? I mean, all of these details, and a lot of this stuff was brought to us by our community. Now, we had to grab me as a student who's saying, this is great. This is a student who's saying, let's see, she's there. No, we're not going to go here. So, I'm going to go here and show you something real quick. Look at that. That's the living room. And that's the prisoner playing on 6 different televisions, the TV series, remotes being broadcast to 6 different TVs. More than that, right? We got it to finally broadcast on 2 different channels. So there's the actual thing we bought from China, the transmitter. And look at that. We have television on 2 different channels, transmitting. Fascinating. Now, this was all done under the gun, right? We did it for no money. We did it for fun. We wanted to create an environment that reproduced the early convergence of media in the home, right? The whole idea of the Atari 2600, cable TV, the VHS, at least in the U.S., was context around bringing you out of the billiards and those kind of, creepy places back to the wholesome living room, right? To experience this. What was crazy to me, has anyone seen Chuck Norris versus Communism, a documentary? If you haven't, you really should. Chuck Norris versus Communism is about how a bootlegging vision of the VHS that started in Romania changed the way in which they understood their culture to some degree. What happened was, they bootlegged a whole bunch of American VHS tapes, particularly Chuck Norris films. Don't ask me why. And what they would do is, this became a kind of network of sharing these VHS, and the actual resale was extremely expensive. They would buy it, and then they would have showings in local living rooms, and people would pay. This was all illegal. This was all underground. But you would have these Romanians who would be listening to this translated or dubbed version of, say, Chuck Norris's MIA or Rambo. And the actual translator, the dubber, was this woman who worked with this guy who started this movie. And she became a national hero. Because she acted out the films. And she talked about it. So this small, seemingly throwaway technology like the VHS became, according to this documentary, a revolutionary vision of another option. Now it's just so bizarre and discordant that option would be Chuck Norris or Sylvester Stallone. But they didn't necessarily focus on the people. They focused on the idea of a community that built independent of the structures it was created in, using a technology as versatile as the VHS. I found that completely fascinating. So anyway, the ULW console was done completely underground. No one basically gave us any approval. We just did it, money out of our own pocket, and there was talk that it was going to go down. Someone was going to take it down because it was a fire risk. That isn't true. Someone at the school started a Reddit campaign saying, my school has an exhibit in the this moment of building a community with a small sense of technology that was in many ways irrelevant, but in many ways also completely relevant for the history of how we got to where we were. And interestingly enough, for about 4 hours one day during our semester, internet went down. It just went down. We were using our Raspberry Pi and a transmitter, so people could actually hang out in the living room, play Atari 2600, watch TV, read a book. No problem. Didn't matter that the internet was down. This was all analog television, right? This was not about the internet in some ways. It was just that kind of context difference. So what happened next is that we had faculty coming to us and saying, like, you know what, we want to program what's on TV. We want to teach in this space. So we want to have an ongoing program so people can come and watch shows and then critically examine them in the context of there. So think of it as a kind of distributed way of thinking about the classroom. A classroom happening in this kind of decontextualized space of 1985, where you would see the tech commercials. How many of us study media already? To see how we were dealing with issues like race, class, or gender in 85 through TV. To see what that looked like. One of my favorite episodes that they played was The Jeffersons. And The Jeffersons dealing with college and the SAT. It's a radical episode. That was just happening in your living room in 1985. And so I was really fascinated about what could it look like. And then just take nightly news and look at the way we're talking about things like communism, right, in the Middle East as a context from the U.S. in 85. As deconstructing the way in which media produces consent and knowledge. It's a fascinating kind of moment to think about a technology outside of our interdependence upon all things web. Right? Much of it was made possible by the web. Without eBay, it wouldn't have happened. But in some ways, it was outside of it in some fascinating ways. So I'm really, as you can see, pretty excited about this idea of the console. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. And that's kind of why I like it so much. Because what I'm here to talk about is this. Right? IT. Isn't this how IT happens, right? Let me see it. This is like IT 1985, right? The white dude, beard, balding, looking at something, maybe playing Pong, right? Like this kind of vision. And this is how we understood the websites, right? How many of you are old enough in this room to have built a website in HTML at your university, right? Few of you, right? Do you remember doing those workshops? Here's how you write HTML. Body tag, header, right? And then the dreaded, now you have to FTP it up. Oh my God. Right? That's when you collapse. That's when you're giving the workshop and you're killing it and you're killing it and you say, okay, FTP. It's an internet protocol, right? And everybody in the room blanks, you know you've lost, go, game over. This is kind of what we did as instructional technologists before we talked about blogs or wikis or LMSs. We had faculty create what early in the arena, a .NET artist, one of my favorites, talks about as the doctor-professor page. And these pages still exist, right? He's probably 25 years older now. But it doesn't matter, because he would never update this page, because he had to FTP it. It didn't matter. And then we have this technology, circa 1999, right? And we're still recovering from this thing. It's called the learning management system. A great big black box where we put everything. And then we say, hey, what are you doing? What is happening? There's this thing called the web. Let's stay away from it. It's complicated. It's messy. It's a fad. It's going away. Just keep everything here. Right? I don't think that's going to work out too well as a philosophy. And then we actually had to support it, right? We had to have people help us. And they want to look like this. What? Did you try turning it on and off? Why are you calling me? Where are you? And then, if I jump forward a little bit, the day of the MOOC. And I love this slide by Michael Branson Smith, who was the video artist who came to UNW and did the living room with us. It all started in Canada, right? longer and uncut. And the day of the week, we had this vision of massive. We were going to revolutionize higher ed because we wouldn't need professors anymore. We would record lectures and put them online and allow people to comment on them. Wait, where's the revolution in that? There was none, right? It was a hype engine. And it's a hype engine we invested hundreds of millions of dollars in, maybe billions, over the last 4 or 5 years. And the logic of it was pretty colonial and pretty problematic, I think, more generally. But it was premised on something that we all seem to associate with the web. Massive. The massive innovation, right? And I think one of the things I'm going to talk about, I think Jeff was a little worried because I was going into that console. I'm like, is he going to stop talking about Atari 2600? Actually, he's right. I may not have. It's lucky. I'll talk about small. Doing things very small. In 1971, E.F. Schumacher wrote a book called Small is Beautiful. And this book was like in reaction to the crisis happening around oil in the 70s. And the crisis happening around how do we imagine big business as necessarily a massive endeavor. And he was saying, well, what if we rethink that entirely? What if we rethink our logic of economics around making it and keeping it small, scalable, and sustainable? What if we talk about the technology not as, necessarily always the newest, greatest thing, but as appropriate technology? What is appropriate to what you're trying to do? For many of the faculty I worked with, the 1985 exhibit was very appropriate for what they were trying to teach. It was very appropriate for how they were trying to interrogate culture. I think I wore that one out. So, I actually used that as a concept to talk about one of the most important theories of the web. The idea of the web with the LMS or with central IT is there's one big system, right? There's one big corporation. You fill in the one big. And David Weinberger wrote a book called Small Pieces Loosely Joined. And he said, in fact, the revolutionary nature of the web is not one big anything. It's a whole bunch of independent nodes on the web building and sharing, creating via links. That was the revolution. In higher ed, what we did is we turned ourselves over to major systems. Blackboard, Canvas, right? There are many, many others in your particular neck of the woods that you would identify as a system that solves the problem. The problem with these big systems is they don't account for difference. They don't account for particularity, and they don't account oftentimes for innovation. So, at the job I did for 10 years, we decided we don't like the system we work within. According to the great Black Flag guitarist Greg Ginn, if you don't like the system, quote unquote, build your own. Don't whine, don't bitch, don't moan. Build something. This is the web. We can do it. My dad's got a bitch and build something. We can fix it. Anyway, that's the best times of it in my heart. For those of you keeping track. So what did we do? In 2004, we got commodity web hosting accounts. Bluehost. $6 a month. All of the instructional technologists got an account. We got a domain, and we started building. We built MediaWiki installs, which is basically what's driving that kind of inconsequential site, Wikipedia. Talk about big tech, and I'll talk about Wikipedia. WordPress. WordPress now drives 25% of all sites on the web. 25%, think about that. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of sites driven by an open source application any of you can install simply for $6 a month. And that's expensive. You can do it cheaper. Crazy. And this is the group I work with at the Division of Teaching and Learning Technologies. Martha Burtis, Tim Owens, Andy Rush, Ryan Brazell. These are 4 people, or 5 people, including me. Yeah. We sat down and we started playing with this. And we did it for over a decade. And we had a particular ethos. Our ethos was try and experiment, and we had about 2 years of experimentation, but don't end there. Build something. So we did. In 2007, it started about 2005, in 2007 we built a publishing platform for our community as an alternative to the LMS. The idea being, interesting, at the University of British Columbia, John Beasley Murray and Brian Lamb, who was its instructional technologist, built an entire curriculum on top of Wikipedia. What they did is, they had their students go in and actually create articles for Latin American authors that didn't have articles, and articles were terrible. These students spent a majority of their time in the library doing research and then bringing that research to Wikipedia. What happened too, and this is an amazing story, is Wikipedia, and someone said this yesterday, I think it was Lloyd, has a crazy political element to it. So they actually spent a lot of their time understanding how the system worked. And there was a team that actually was called the FA team. I think playing on the A team, if you know that show, it's a US show. And it was called the Featured Article Team. The idea was not only put stuff up on Wikipedia, but make those articles featured. Get them featured. One small percentage of articles on Wikipedia get featured. This class had 3 featured articles. It had 5 good articles. And that's because a community on Wikipedia came out and worked with the students. Talk about an experience to understand how it will work. Let's talk about how much the infrastructure cost for this project. How much did they have to pay to keep Wikipedia running? Nothing. It's just completely free. And I think it was a really important lesson in the social and political construction of knowledge in our digital moment. Fascinating project. I still think one of the most remarkable I've seen, and that was in 2008. But it hasn't gone away. FemTechNet is a collaborative of scholars that actually intentionally take that idea and they do something called wiki storming. They get together as groups. They go into wiki pages that maybe are underrepresenting women in the field of technology and beyond, and they challenge it. They enter the political fray. And they look at what is being framed by whom and why. That's a really interesting intervention in this idea of open technology. I love it. Another thing that happened, this is interesting, and I may not say the full story, is we had at our library a centennial, 2008. That was our 100th year anniversary at the University of Mary Washington, where I worked for a decade. And we wanted to do something big. We wanted to get images, thousands of images, out online to celebrate that history. And so they came, we built Vital. Does anyone know Vital or Fedora? It's a system that sits on top of Fedora. It's an archiving system. It's big. It's monolithic. It takes someone to run it. So we started building this. Investment, money, time. That person got another job and left. That archive for years sat dormant. So we put it all on Flickr. And we shared it. And if you look for the UNW Centennial now, the actual archive is up now. All of the images and all of the views are still on Flickr, and when you search on Google, you find everything, not only by Flickr, but by the students at UNW who blogged it. They are the trace of that history. The students and the faculty who wrote about it. Not the image in and of itself as this rarefied object that needs to be preserved. Interesting. But this was too big, right? And I'm playing with Steve Martin. I won't play the clip. Let's get small. It's this whole comic thing from 78. That was too big. Even having commodity web hosting where you do stuff, whether it be through a WordPress site, through an entire community, which we did, we wanted to think about it even more granularly. What if we gave every student and faculty their own domain of web hosting, like we had as instructional technologists in 2005? What if I said to our faculty, we're not going to host your stuff. You're going to host it. You're going to build it, and you're going to take it with you. Same with the students. And this is what we call a personal cyber infrastructure. And this is an article from 2009 written by Gardner Campbell that kind of talks about his philosophy. And out of it came this beautiful monster beast, and I know that someone in this room actually came into contact with them through this class, and they're even sporting their DS-106 colors. So they may even stand up at some point and show off their DS-106 shirt. People call DS-106 a cult. I am not a cult leader. I just want to be on the record. I play one on TV, but I'm not one. What was DS-106? You guys are not laughing, so you must really think I'm a cult member.
DS-106 was the actual realization of this idea of every student doesn't come onto my system. They get their own domain name, they install their own application, and whatever they do syndicates into a course site, right? It's something called POSSE. I love the acronyms. Publish on your own site, syndicate everywhere. This is the web. This is small pieces loosely joined. You do your work on your site and link to it and click back. You own it. It's your personal archive. Because for me, the only thing that's ever going to scale is the individual on the web. It's never going to be massive. Having 150,000 people in your class will never matter. You minding and keeping your own work is always what will matter. The individual archivist. And so we played with this. We built some really interesting technology around it. Martha Burtis built an assignment bank. Now what happens with this? Every student, sure, absolutely. So while they're talking, do you mind if I talk while they're there? So let me talk about this assignment bank for a second. The assignment bank, Martha Burtis built it, allows you on your own site with 2 tags to publish your post onto this DS-106 course site. And when you do, that assignment becomes part of an assignment bank. How many of you have ever seen a site called Ravelry? The knitting site. Anyone into knitting? We took this idea from Ravelry. Ravelry is brilliant. People create this sweater on a certain pattern, and then they share the sweater. And people are like, that's awesome, I want to try that. And so they look at what you did, and then they play off it. And this particular sweater becomes something potentially tens or hundreds of other people do. And so the actual sweater is the assignment. Well, we did the same thing, but we did it with GIFs. We did it with visual assignments, video assignments, audio assignments, you name it. People would do an assignment on their own space, share it out, and other people would riff on it. And so when you went to the assignment bank, you would see all the different assignments people did. It's pretty cool. And I'm going to show you that. So for example, in the US in the 80s, I'm stuck in the 80s, we had these read posters, right? Where people would be like, X reads, right? So we had an assignment someone created, because students create the assignments. It's not my assignments. It's the community's assignments. Someone created this assignment. You'll see there's an Atari 2601. And you'll notice here, this is the assignment. So far, you'll list all the people who've done the assignment. Will be listed right there. And students aren't given, you do these assignments, they're given do X amount of stars, which are difficulties of the assignments. And once they do, sorry, let me go back here. And once they do, you see all the people who've done that assignment. What we realized with the read assignment is that students in 2nd grade at various primary schools were doing read assignments and submitting them to DS-106. So we have this kind of course infrastructure that primary school students were actually helping us build out. And that idea that this wasn't limited to any one group was fascinating. The class also had a radio station built in British Columbia by Grant Potter. So as on the fly, we were actually starting to broadcast our audio assignments via the radio. Students actually built out a whole part of the course infrastructure called Inspire. 2 students, Rachel McGurk and Eileen McKenna, built out this space that allowed other students to share the work that inspired them. And that was actually part of our infrastructure. Now notice, our infrastructure is completely distributed. It's completely small. Students own their own content, distributed into DS-106, and then it also happens in places like Twitter with hashtags, etc. One of the interesting things from an archivist point of view, because I will get to this, is that all the content students did on their own site was theirs and they take with them, but it was also archived on DS-106 because of syndication. So everything that happened was still there. We didn't lose any of the posts. And so this led to our next experimentation, domain of one's own. What if we said everyone at the University of Mary Washington could get their own domain and web hosting, and we could give it to them for free? And they could actually build out their own digital identity. They could start framing their own digital footprint. They could start taking control. Faculty who wanted to work with Omega or WordPress or Scalar could. And they could do it through a single sign-on system within the university. And we did. And we had faculty started creating awesome stuff. Jack Bale's a librarian at UMW who does a lot of work on early baseball. He didn't blog any of his work. He got his own site called WrigleyIvy.com about the Cubs field. And after he started sharing his early research of the Cubs, he started getting publications, researches, invitations to speak. He was published in journals like Nine. He became a kind of figure through broadcasting out the amazing research he was doing. Faculty actually built course sites on their domain. So it wasn't about their personal identity. It was about sharing research about the Taiping Civil War. The faculty and the students at taipingcivilwar.org, you can search it, Taiping Civil War, this will be the third site that comes up on Google. They actually, students using Timeline.js, a great free open tool by Northwestern, by using Google Maps, and by recording through Skype an interview with the person who wrote the book recently at Johns Hopkins about the Taiping Civil War. This is open education happening in practice through the classroom, made solid by a domain. Gotcha. That's all I need. Now, it didn't stop there. You could create themes where you could put an entire book on and have people comment and annotate. This is just a theme in WordPress, right? A theme that comes up again in WordPress, at least for us, is there's nothing you can't do with it. Recently, the University of Oklahoma was experimenting with the domain of one's own idea. They created a Omeka, which we heard about yesterday, and several people have talked about Omeka. They created an Omeka on the New Deal. And Omeka actually featured the work they were doing. It was all about Oklahoma, specific elements of what happened during the Depression in Oklahoma, shared and created by students, and then featured by the very people who create the application. Davidson College, a small liberal arts college in North Carolina, is using this idea of the domains for a few reasons. And I want to kind of point them out quickly. Developing technical and critical web literacy. What tools are we using to help our faculty, students, and librarians understand the critical elements of the web? Forge a digital identity. How important is it for you to forge an identity online? How important is it for our students? Reclaim ownership and control. And this is something I'm going to talk about. Explore the possibilities of blended learning and social pedagogies. Now, they say, Audrey Waters, for me, is one particular touchstone. They say data is the new oil, right? What people are forging is our data. They want our data, that's why Facebook gives us things for free, that's why Google gives us things for free. The product isn't free email, the product isn't, oh, I get to see my community on Facebook. The product is us. They're buying and selling us. And that's a negotiation you freely walk into, and I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but how many of our students understand that? And are we critically examining what that means for us? I mean, we talked about it. The President Hodges talked about this being a CIA camp in '66. Post-Snowden, NSA. This isn't crazy talk. I'm not a conspiracy theorist talking about it might be important to think about your own privacy online. That's pretty much established now. How we do it, though, and how we have structures that help us do it is another question. One of the things that people are working on is actually small tools. Go even smaller. Brian Lamb and Grant Potter up at the University of Thompson Rivers University and the University of North British Columbia are working on these things called SPLOT, the smallest possible online learning tool, or learning online tool. It's not very clear what it means. The idea is, you just have a tool with a form that people use. They can be anonymous and they submit something, right? One thing, a writing tool, an audio tool, an image tool, right? You want to create an image library for your students? One tool, one form, completely simple. You don't have to identify yourself. And that's the idea of the SPLOT, and it's really powerful. Other things like Sandstorm. Sandstorm is a new kind of server infrastructure that you can install and have applications like Etherpad or file serving. And they're actually doing some very interesting stuff. It's an alternative. Talk about alternatives for everyone. DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean provides an entire infrastructure for schools, libraries, students that's really affordable, and you can completely circumvent IT entirely. So the idea of, I could never imagine doing this, actually you could. And I won't talk about it, but this idea of Docker, this idea of having complete applications in a container that move from server to server is really, really powerful. And this is some of what's on the horizon, and it's some of what I think will interrupt what's possible at your universities for a lot of money. Because none of these require huge systems. They're all small. They're all affordable. Now I want to end talking a little bit about the archive team. Because this is my basic point of this whole presentation. The archive team is a group of renegade archivists. That's what they are. And that's what they identify. And what do? They look for failing Web 2.0 sites. Sites we've invested in, we put our materials in, we put our life in, our digital life. Those that are going away, like Posterous, right? Like Blip TV. There are many others, like GeoCities. They go and they actually archive them. And I'm really fascinated. It's led by this guy named Jason Scott, although he's not he wouldn't call himself a leader, but he's often associated with it. 2010, he and a bunch of other people all around the world archived 2 terabytes of data from Yahoo called GeoCities. They had bought it for $3 billion, right? In the turn of the 90s, during the first dot-com bubble. And in 2010, they decided to destroy it, to get rid of it. But not even like keep it as an archive, to destroy it, to delete it. Delete 15 years of the web's history. The archivist in you is dying, right? I know it isn't me. He said no. Not an institution, not a formal archive, not something grant-funded. A few people around the world said, we want to save this bit of culture because it's important. And they did. They created the biggest torrent at the time, a 2 terabyte torrent with the entire history of GeoCities on it. Fascinating, right? And so this artist, who I talked about again, I'll talk about, Olia Leolina and her husband, Dragon Esplanade, created a site around it. They downloaded the torrent and they created a Tumblr. And what the Tumblr does, and it's one of my favorite Tumblrs, is it takes screenshots chronologically of all the sites ever created on GeoCities. It's an amazing project. It's an amazing integration and kind of excavation of our history. Talk about archaeology. That a corporation, those sponsors that President Hodges talked about, was ready to delete. All of that content, they didn't care. It took a group of rogue archivists around the web to save it. But I will stop, I promise. So you've been pretty good about trying to stop me. But I do want to end somewhere. And I want to end here. So I was working on my presentation last night, right? And I actually started in the beginning, right? What brought me to this whole Web 2.0? I'm not a technologist. I'm not a computer science professor. I'm a failed PhD in American history. I think that's pretty cool. Oh, I don't want to talk about her. Let's talk about me, right? But this is how I started. This is me and my son Miles, 11 years ago. We were there to pump you up, right? You ever see that one, right? Hans in France, right? This is how my whole web experience. My wife's family was in Italy. We created a blog in 2004 on WordPress and 2005 to actually communicate everything that was happening back, right? And so last night while I was working on this presentation, I was like, you know what? That site's offline. And I brought it back online. WordPress from 2008 was the last time it was basically updated. I spent my time thinking about that history I had with my family, with my son. With that personal, small history that got me interested in WordPress and started me on my career. That's what mattered. In the end, this idea of archiving and creating our sense of the web that matters to us. The only thing that will ever scale on the web is not massive. It's the one. It's the individual. It's the work you're doing and then can share openly through a linked community with others. The more we give over control of the web we inhabit, the more we sacrifice a free and open web. I think for me, there are many battles to be fought, but the most important one, and the one I would leave you is, how many of you have a site like this somewhere? Have images like this, whether it's on your, I don't care if it's on the web, whether it's on your computer, that you know you have to archive, that you know you have to contend with because you're afraid of that hard drive going bad or that site going away. That, to me, is where the whole thing starts. With you stopping, taking inventory, and doing that. That's the web. That's the digital world in which I think any of this is going to matter. The smallness of us taking control of that bit of the web, like the archive team did, to save a huge cultural relic, like GeoCities. I mean, fascinating to think about that. That had to be saved, right? Like the Roman Forum. It's crazy. So anyway, with that, I'll end my talk, and thank you for the time.
You talked about Jim's obsession with the 80s when I was introducing him, and I showed them that, but you guys know it now. So okay, I'm going to take questions from the audience here, and you want me to go stand over there? See me. I'm going to walk around. For people who want to ask questions, you can move. You say. So,
I told you about the mind being blown. I wasn't kidding.
So
I'm not surprised you're
Jim,
all
you can use
speechless.
that mic. Jim, you see this mic? You can use that one for a minute, like the one right
This
here,
one right
and then
here.
I'll ask you to
Okay.
come here. But
I need to go over here. Yes. Thank you. Okay.
And keep the laptop because there are people asking questions on YouTube as well.
Cool. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so there's one. Hi.
It's so funny because last night I BitTorrented the current episode of The Americans. I don't know if you're following that show, but it's about two Soviet spies who are a family in Washington, D.C. in the 1980s. And last night's episode, they were watching the day after. And it was all about that episode, or that film. And but it's interesting. I guess I just want to make that comment because I was watching the 80s through a current television paradigm, having lived through the 80s, and now see your project there. It's interesting. It would be very interesting to do a project with the students where they could actually watch how the 80s is mediated now through the media versus how the 80s mediated itself.
Yeah, I agree. And that stuff to me is like the endless interest. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and Zach Whalen was the professor who I worked with together on that, what would one of these look like 10 years later? So think about 95, Windows 95, like modems. Nintendo came out with the first virtual reality game in 1995 called Virtual Game Boy. It was a horrible piece of technology, and I really like the horrible technology because it was actually like you would put your head in it, like we're seeing all the kids with the VR now, right? Oh, this is cool. But it was the same thing, but you had to stand because it was so heavy. And it had a warning as soon as you got on that said, if you use this more than 15 minutes, it's at your own risk. Because it was all red vector graphics. And it literally messed with your mind, right? Like I think virtual reality is going to do in general. And it would be like, we bought it with the idea that we're going to do one of these. Now I left Mayor Washington, but I just like the idea. And what I like is I speak specifically from American context. I'm a kid of Long Island, like that's what I know. But I was so fascinated why I wanted to mention the Romanian context is, for me that documentary was so brilliant because it framed the media that I took for granted in a totally different political and cultural context that was fascinating. And it talked about the effect of media, both for good and for bad, on how we understand our particular position. And I just think like the idea of a rogue exhibit that people are engaged to use. For me, that was the thing. Like, they were like, well, people will steal stuff. It's like, all right, that's fine. The cartridge cost $1 on eBay. We can live without that cartridge. But to give them ownership, nothing got stolen. And we had students bringing in their Nintendo collection, their cassette collection, their records. And the students were interested in the 80s for the very reason you said. They didn't live through that, many of them. So they had no context to understand. Like, watching them try and put in a VHS tape and play it was awesome. They're like, how does this work? And then we threw a beta tape, and they're like, what? And then the Selectavision, they were sitting around it like it was the Coke can, and right, like the gods must be crazy. They're like, what is this, right? We have no idea. So it was a really fascinating way to think about how technology has framed who we are, but in a particular cultural moment. You know, there were instructional technologists in 1985. They were dealing with laser discs. right? They were dealing with early ideas of the internet, right? Before pre-browser, but they existed. Librarians were dealing with this same question. And I love kind of reframing the idea of history around this stuff. Because oftentimes, like President Hodges said, it's dehistoricized. It's the Silicon Valley narrative. Everything's going to blow your mind. Just get ready. Take it in. And I think, no, there's a long, and particularly with this group, there's a long and very particular set of histories around the development of that technology and what it means. And it's not unilateral, and it's not necessarily evenly developed, but all of those stories tell us something, you know, and so technology is the way to think through that story. But then also for me, I do think I came to the web as a preservationist, as an archivist. Like, I wanted to archive my kids growing up. And the reason I did is because I came up in a family of 7, right? Shanty Irish on Long Island, right? How many kids do we have? 6, 7? And then I didn't have any pictures of me because I was the 6th of 7. There's no pictures of me till I'm like 12. So my kid has like 50 million pictures because I was going to make up for what my family failed to do. So there's some weird like psychoanalytic stuff happening there too. But it actually is what, well, that's interesting, right? The individual reasons that drove me were particular. I think as everyone in this room has that reason for them. And that to me is the web. I love a web made up of a whole series of maniacs. Good maniacs, but maniacs, right? Who are generatively sharing their part of their experience online. And that's what the web always was for me. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hi, being both an archivist and an archaeologist and having a sensitivity for physical objects, I would like to ask you what you think the benefit is of what you did for this 85 room as opposed to an experience that would be completely virtual. Because when sometimes you talk to IT people, they think all experiences can be virtual. So you could create the same room in a virtual context. You could have, I don't know what an IT person would imagine, you could have videos showing you people of how they were using the devices. Sometimes it's very difficult to communicate with media department and persuade them that you have an old disk, that you want to do something with it, you don't want to throw it away. Yes. So I would like your opinion about the benefit of having this room that is physical and not virtual.
You know, I'm a total fan of the virtual, so I don't want to be like, hey, you know, this could only be done physical. The problem is that everyone thinks there's a one-to-one relation between the physical and the virtual. There's not. Certain things in the virtual work beautifully. But you can't reproduce watching a student stumble to put a VHS tape in a player online. You can't do it. You can't reproduce how a Selectavision disc works. You couldn't do that online yet. Maybe with virtual reality that will change. I don't know if we're there yet. But physically, you can't reproduce the smells. Like, the smell of a VHS tape is particular. The aura of cathode ray tube. Like, even playing Donkey Kong on an LED versus a cathode tube is a completely, radically different experience. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is. Watching TV like The Young and the Restless on a cathode tube that actually jumps and is completely low resolution is part of its experience. You can't produce that online. Not yet. Maybe you will. And I personally just love the physicality of the space with the students. Because we were all there, like, looking through, and then I would tell them, like, I'll beat you at Space Invaders, and I would, because I'm awesome. But, like, another thing, like Space Invaders. How many of you knew Space Invaders had 160 game settings? 160 game settings on Space Invaders. I know that sounds like, what are you talking about? Like, you could do double invisible for half the game. Like, there is nothing more complex than Space Invaders game settings. And you can't even begin to get into that with emulation. So I really think that there is no substitute for something like this. And also to make the point that when that virtual experience goes away, like the internet was down for 4 hours, this stuff, it existed outside of that time. Right? We are always controlled by the medium in which we're mediated by.
I think the coolest thing about the virtual physicality of the exhibit is it gave us an opportunity to jump out of that. If not for a moment, because I'm not pretending like we reproduced 85 and everyone was running around with parachute pants.
Time capsule.
Exactly. And it was the funnest thing I ever did. And talking about time capsules, I'm being timed out. So thank you all very much. That was great.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Francisca Vanna, I'm the librarian at this place, and we moved the coffee break to the auditorium, and once you're drinking